Why did no one hear the splash? They heard the impact. They saw the water explode upward. They laughed when her body disappeared beneath the surface, hands bound tight behind her back, ankles cinched with rope like an afterthought. But when the ripples flattened too quickly, when the surface went calm far sooner than it should have, something shifted in the air. Aria Monroe sank straight down. 20 meters is a long way when you're tied like cargo. The pressure wrapped around her chest instantly, cold and final, squeezing the breath from her lungs. Above her, sunlight fractured into pale ribbons, already distant. Below her, only blue depth and silence. On the deck, Sergeant Blake Core paced with confidence sharpened by years of breaking people for a living. He didn't lean forward. He didn't count. He'd already decided how this would end. They always ended the same way. "She'll thrash," someone muttered. 10 seconds, another whispered. Aria didn't thrash. Her body went still, not with fear but with choice. Chin tucked, spine long, heart slowing instead of racing. Panic was the tax everyone paid in water like this. She refused to pay it. Her lungs burned, but the burn wasn't new. It carried her backward, years before this pool, before the uniform, before the eyes watching for failure. A swollen river in Montana, spring runoff, her boots slipping on wet stone, boys laughing on the bank while the current tore her under. Panic kills faster than water. Her father's voice hadn't shouted. It had been steady, almost calm, like a hand on her back. Below the surface now, Aria opened her eyes. Let the water in. Let the world slow. Above her, the laughter began to thin. Someone leaned closer to the edge, squinting. The pool looked wrong, too calm, too quiet. "Where is she?" a recruit whispered. Sergeant Core folded his arms, smirk fixed, but his jaw twitched. He hated silence. Silence meant variables. At the far end of the deck, Captain Elias Rain didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply watched his stopwatch tick. Aria counted heartbeats. She flexed her ankles against the rope. Not hard, not desperate, just enough to feel the knot. Double wrap, sloppy, strong but impatient. Someone who tied it assumed panic would do the rest. Her lungs screamed. She waited. Then she bobbed. One clean rise. No splash. Lips barely breaking the surface. A stolen sip of air that burned like fire and vanished just as fast. Then she sank again, smooth and deliberate, as if the water itself had invited her back. A few recruits laughed nervously. "That doesn't count," someone said. But the sound had changed. Less hunger, more confusion. Below again, Aria angled her body, knees bending, ankles grinding against the rope. Pain flared where fibers bit into skin. She welcomed it. Pain meant movement. Movement meant leverage. Above, Captain Rain's stylus scratched once against glass. Minutes stretched. Sweat ran down faces in the desert heat. No one checked the time out loud anymore. Then the rope shifted. Just a fraction, just enough. Aria felt it more than she saw it. The outer loop gave a breath, a mistake in tension, a gap no wider than a finger but wide enough to matter. Her lungs convulsed. She dragged her ankles toward her bound hands, body curling into itself. Fingertips scraped blind along wet fiber. Skin tore. Blood feathered into the blue like smoke. She surfaced again, a breath ripped into her chest, gone. Down again. This time, her knuckle wedged into the gap. On the deck, someone swore under their breath. "No way." Sergeant Core stepped closer to the edge without realizing he'd moved. Aria twisted, not fast, not strong, correct. The rope groaned, fibers protested, her vision tunneled. Then release. One ankle slipped free. The sound that followed wasn't cheering, it was shock. Aria didn't celebrate, she didn't rush. She kicked diagonally, body angling for the wall. Her free foot found the ladder rung by instinct, muscle memory older than this place. She anchored, rolled, slammed shoulder and hip into concrete. She spilled out of the pool like something the water had failed to keep. She lay there for a second, chest heaving, wrists still bound, one ankle still tethered, breathing steady, controlled. No one laughed. Water poured off her uniform in sheets. The desert sun carved light along her shoulders, turning droplets into steel. She rose to her knees. And in that moment, everyone watching understood something they hadn't planned for. She hadn't survived by force. She survived by restraint. What kind of person doesn't look relieved after escaping death? Arya stood. Not quickly, not dramatically. She simply unfolded herself from the deck like someone finishing a routine exercise. Her face was calm, too calm, as if what had just happened wasn't the hardest thing she'd done that day. Sergeant Core opened his mouth, closed it again. The recruits stared at her like the ground had shifted under their boots. Then she rolled her shoulders. The rope snapped. The sound cracked across the yard, sharp, final. Fibers split against her hip and fell slack. She brought her hands forward, shook the cord free, and let it drop. It hit the concrete and stayed there. Captain Rain stepped forward. His boots were deliberate, his posture formal, his eyes never left hers. Nightshade Marker observed, he said into his mic, voice low and precise. Protocol verified. The words meant nothing to the recruits. The salute did. He snapped to attention. Major Monroe, evaluation complete. The yard inhaled as one. Major. Sergeant Core's face drained of color. This is a setup, he snapped. She cheated. Arya turned her head slowly. Her voice didn't rise. If weakness is enough to provoke cruelty, she said, then you were unfit to lead long before today. Captain Rain didn't hesitate. Sergeant Blake Core, you are relieved of training authority effective immediately. Core froze, rage flickered, then something else, recognition, the kind that arrives too late. He left without looking back. Arya faced the formation. She said nothing at first. Silence did the work. Then softly, I've watched you for 18 days. Some recruits straightened, others dropped their eyes. Not your strength, she continued, your character. She pointed. 3 names, 3 faces. The rest understood all at once. This had never been about the pool. Why does the hardest test come after you think you've already passed? The wind tugged at their uniforms as Arya stepped closer, water still dripping from her sleeves. I didn't come here to see how far you could run, she said. I came to see who you are when you think no one who matters is watching. She knelt, scooped a handful of dirt, let it fall through her fingers. The ground doesn't care who you are, she said quietly. It only asks one question when you're thrown down. Will you rise? Some swallowed, some flinched. Arya stood. Most of you failed that test, she said. That's not punishment, it's direction. She turned to the 3 she'd chosen. You'll train with me. Captain Rain closed his tablet. The desert sun burned overhead, but something cooler settled in the yard. Respect. Not fear, not all. Respect earned the hard way. Arya looked at them one last time. True strength, she said, isn't proven by how many you break. A pause. It's proven by how many you refuse to let fall. No one moved. Then slowly one recruit snapped to attention, then another, then all of them. Not because they were ordered. Because they understood. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence feel heavier than the water ever had? Arya Monroe stood at the edge of the training yard while the recruits were dismissed, her uniform still damp, boots leaving faint prints on sun-baked concrete. The pool behind her looked ordinary again. Just water, just tiles, just another place people pretended danger couldn't reach them. But everyone who had watched knew better now. Something had shifted, and no one could quite name it. She felt it too. Not triumph, not relief. Exposure. Captain Elia's Rain walked beside her without speaking, the desert wind tugging at the sleeves of his uniform. He waited until they were far enough from the yard that no one could overhear before he spoke. "You could have surfaced sooner," he said, not accusing, just precise. "You chose not to." Arya didn't answer immediately. She watched a pair of recruits in the distance arguing quietly, their voices sharp with shaken pride. "They needed to sit in the uncertainty," she said at last. "So did he." Rain nodded once. He didn't ask who she meant. "Medical will want to check." "I'm fine." "I know," he said. "That wasn't the point." They stopped near the low concrete wall that bordered the facility. Beyond it, the Nevada desert stretched wide and indifferent, scrub and dust and heat mirages. Arya leaned her forearms against the wall and finally let herself breathe all the way out. For a moment, the composure cracked. Not visibly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but inside something trembled loose. She had been back in that river. She could still feel the pull of it in her chest, the way water steals choice if you let it. The memory had never softened. She just learned to live around it like scar tissue. Rain watched her from the corner of his eye. "Kor didn't know who you were," he said. "That wasn't an accident." "No," Arya agreed. "It was a filter." Rain's mouth tightened. "You knew he'd crossed the line." "I knew he would show himself," she said. "Men like him always do when they think power is private." Rain exhaled slowly. "Command won't love how this played out." "They didn't send me here to be loved." They stood in silence again. Somewhere, a whistle blew. Training resumed for those who hadn't been dismissed. The machine didn't stop just because one truth had surfaced. Rain finally turned to face her fully. "You're sure about taking them?" Her eyes hardened, not with anger but resolve. "I'm sure about not wasting them." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I'll back you." That mattered more than he let on. What happens after you prove yourself and still feel unfinished? That night Arya lay awake in her quarters, staring at the ceiling fan as it carved slow circles through the stale air. Sleep came in fragments, short, shallow drops she surfaced from too quickly. Every time she closed her eyes, the pool returned. The quiet, the counting, the rope biting into skin. She rolled onto her side and stared at the wall instead. She had volunteered for this assignment knowing exactly what it would cost. Not physically. She paid those prices before. This was different. This required restraint, patience, letting people misunderstand her on purpose. It turned out that hurt in ways she hadn't expected. Being invisible had always been safer than being underestimated. But here, she needed both. She needed to be dismissed, laughed at, reduced. Needed to watch cruelty unfold without stopping it too soon. She pressed her fingers into the mattress, grounding herself. This was the work. At dawn, she was already on the yard when the selected recruits arrived. 3 of them. They halted several steps away, unsure whether to salute, speak, or wait. Arya let the silence stretch. Not to intimidate, to observe. Jace Renner stood with his shoulders squared but his jaw tight, like someone bracing for impact. Hannah Lee's eyes were alert, measuring everything. Miguel Torres kept glancing at the ground, as if still surprised he was here at all. "Relax," Arya said finally. "I'm not here to perform." That threw them more than yelling would have. "We're not starting with drills," she continued. "We're starting with a walk." They exchanged looks but didn't question it. That was point number 1. They moved out past the perimeter fence, boots crunching over gravel and dust. The sun climbed quickly, heat already pressing in. Arya set a steady pace, not easy, not punishing. "Why us?" Torres asked eventually, unable to hold it in any longer. Arya didn't slow. "Because you didn't think you were being graded." Renner frowned. "With respect, ma'am, everyone's always being graded." Arya glanced back at him. "That's what they want you to think. Real tests don't announce themselves." They walked in silence again. After several minutes, Hana spoke. "Sergeant Core, did he know?" "No. Did you?" "Yes." That answer landed heavier. Renner swallowed. Then why let it go that far? Arya stopped. She turned to face them, the desert stretching empty behind her. "Because intervention teaches compliance," she said. "Observation teaches truth." They absorbed that quietly. She resumed walking. Cruelty rarely introduces itself as cruelty. It calls itself tradition, pressure, toughening people up. I needed to see who would accept that explanation. "And the rest?" Renner asked. Arya's voice was steady. "They showed me who they are right now. That doesn't mean it's who they'll always be." What does leadership look like when no one is clapping? The walk ended at a dry wash carved into the earth, its edges sharp and uneven. Arya stepped down into it without hesitation. "This is your first exercise," she said. "Get across without help. Don't rush, don't compete." They stared at the uneven terrain. "There's no rope," Tors said. "I know." She sat on a rock and watched. At first they attacked it like everything else they'd been trained to do, fast, forceful, inefficient. Renner slipped once, cursing under his breath. Tors scraped his palm. Hana stopped, reassessed, changed her angle. Arya noticed everything. After several failed attempts, frustration crept in. Breathing sharpened, pride flared. "Pause," Arya said quietly. They froze. "Look," she said, "not at the obstacle, at each other." That was harder. Slowly they adjusted. Renner braced himself instead of charging. Hana directed without raising her voice. Tors moved last, steady and deliberate. They crossed. It wasn't clean, it wasn't impressive. It was enough. Arya stood. "You'll be tempted to prove yourself every day," she said. "Resist that urge. Proving isn't the same as being ready." They nodded, sweat streaking dust across their faces. As they turned back toward the facility, Tors asked, "Did you ever want to quit?" Arya didn't answer right away. "Yes," she said finally, "and no." He waited. "I never wanted to stop being who I was," she continued. "I just wanted the world to stop testing me for it." They walked the rest of the way in thoughtful silence. Why does growth hurt even when it's chosen? Later that afternoon, Arya watched from the shade as the remaining recruits trained under new supervision. There was less shouting now, less spectacle, more focus. It wouldn't last forever. It never did, but it was a start. Rain joined her again, hands clasped behind his back. "Command signed off," he said. "Your program stands." She nodded. "They always do after the storm passes." "You stirred one." She allowed herself a small, humorless smile. "Storms reveal foundations." Rain studied the yard. "You're harder on yourself than them." Arya didn't deny it. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the concrete, she felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not peace. Purpose. She had survived the water. That had never been the question. The real test was what she did after rising. And this time, she wasn't doing it alone. Why did the smallest mistake feel louder than gunfire? Arya noticed it before anyone else did. It wasn't during a drill. It wasn't even during training hours. It was a pause, a fraction too long, when a recruit hesitated before answering a simple question. The kind of hesitation most instructors ignored. The kind that got people hurt later. She was standing off to the side of the yard, arms folded, eyes tracking movement without seeming to. The sun had begun its slow descent, heat easing but not forgiving. Dust hung in the air, kicked up by boots and effort and nerves that hadn't yet learned how to settle. Again, the acting instructor barked. The recruit moved, too fast, overcorrected. Arya felt it in her chest before she saw it happen. The stumble, the sharp intake of breath, the flash of embarrassment that rippled outward as heads turned. She didn't intervene. Not yet. That night she reviewed footage alone in her office. No sound, just bodies in motion. Mistakes lived in the margins, tiny shifts of weight, shoulders tensing too early, eyes dropping at the wrong moment. She paused the screen on the recruit who had stumbled, replayed it, slower this time. Fear. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind that learned to hide. Arya leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Fear like that didn't come from weakness. It came from memory. What does it mean when training starts to feel personal? The next morning began before sunrise. The 3 selected recruits stood waiting when Arya arrived, packs already on, faces set with the kind of focus that came from not knowing what was coming next. Today, Arya said, you'll learn to listen to silence. Rainier blinked, ma'am. She turned and started walking. They followed. They moved beyond the usual perimeter, farther than before. The terrain changed gradually, hard ground giving way to looser earth, scrub thickening, visibility shrinking. No talking, Arya said without looking back, until I say otherwise. Minutes passed, then an hour. Boots crunched, packs shifted, breathing synced, then drifted, then found a rhythm again. Arya listened. She listened to how they moved when they thought no one was correcting them, who rushed, who held back, who adjusted without being told. At a narrow ravine, she stopped abruptly. Tors nearly collided with her back. She turned slowly. What did you hear? They exchanged glances. Wind, Hana said carefully. Birds, Rainier added. Arya's gaze stayed on Tors. Nothing, he said. That's what scared me. Arya nodded once. Good. She stepped aside and gestured toward the ravine. Cross. There was no obvious path. Loose rock, sharp drop. One wrong step would mean a fall, not fatal but painful, enough to matter. They hesitated. That pause you feel, Arya said quietly. That's instinct checking ego. Learn to respect it. They crossed one by one, slowly, deliberately. When they reached the other side, Arya finally spoke again. Most people don't fail because they don't know what to do. They fail because they stop listening to themselves. She watched their faces absorb that. Then she turned back toward the facility. Let's see who else needs to hear that. Why does authority reveal more than pressure ever could? The shift didn't go unnoticed. Other recruits began to watch her differently, not with fear, with something more complicated, curiosity edged with caution, respect tangled with resentment. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't humiliate. She corrected once, expected it to stick. For some it did. For others it didn't. One afternoon she caught 2 recruits mocking a third near the equipment racks. Nothing overt, just tone, just implication, the kind of cruelty that hid behind humor. Arya stopped walking. They noticed too late. She didn't reprimand them publicly. She didn't call them out in front of the unit. She assigned them extra responsibility. Leadership roles, accountability. They failed at it within a week. When they came to her office, defensive and irritated, she listened without interrupting. Then she said, "You wanted power without empathy. This is what that looks like." They didn't argue after that. Not because they were scared. Because they understood. What does it cost to stay controlled when control is mistaken for coldness? Late one evening, Arya stood alone at the edge of the pool. The lights were off, the water was still, no audience, no test. She rolled up her sleeves and sat down, boots dangling inches above the surface. Her wrists ached where the rope had bitten days ago. Bruises yellowed slowly, healing but not gone. She let her fingers skim the water. For a moment, she considered getting in. She didn't. Some ghosts didn't need to be invited closer. Footsteps echoed behind her. Rain stopped several paces away. You don't rest much. I rest enough. That wasn't an answer. She smiled faintly. Neither was that. He stepped closer, eyes following the ripples her fingers made. You're changing the culture faster than command expected. They expected compliance, she said. I'm offering reflection. That makes people uncomfortable. It should. Rain studied her, and you. She withdrew her hand from the water. Droplets slid down her skin. I'm learning where the line is, she said, between restraint and distance. Have you found it? No. He nodded. That might be why this is working. Why does trust arrive quietly and leave no room for doubt? The breakthrough came during a night navigation exercise. No spectators, no speeches. Just darkness and terrain and decisions that mattered. One team lost their way, panic crept in, voices sharpened. Arya watched from a distance, saying nothing. Then one recruit, same one who had stumbled days earlier, spoke up. Calm, measured, correct. The team adjusted. They finished late, exhausted but intact. When they returned, no one celebrated. No one complained. Arya addressed them briefly. You didn't win, she said. You adapted. She let that sit. Later, as they dispersed, Tors lingered. Ma'am. Yes. I didn't think I could do that, he admitted. Arya met his eyes. Most people don't until they do. He nodded, something settling into place. Why does leadership feel loneliest when it's done right? That night, alone again, Arya reviewed the day's reports. Progress, resistance, small victories no one would ever document. She closed the file and leaned back. The room was quiet. For the first time since arriving, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. She thought of the pool, the rope, the moment she chose not to surface. That choice had changed more than one afternoon. It had set a standard. And standards, once set, had a way of outlasting fear. Arya stood, turned off the light and left the office. Tomorrow would test her again. But tonight, she allowed herself one quiet truth. Strength wasn't about rising alone. It was about making sure fewer people had to drown to learn how. What happens when the test stops being external and starts pushing back? The incident didn't happen during training hours. That's what bothered Arya the most. It came in the form of a quiet knock on her office door just after dusk, when the heat had finally loosened its grip and the yard outside lay half-lit, half-forgotten. Captain Rain stood there, posture tight, expression carefully neutral. "We've got a situation," he said. Arya didn't ask what kind. She reached for her cap and followed him. They walked past the barracks, past the motor pool, toward the older wing of the facility, the one still standing mostly because tearing it down cost more than ignoring it. The lights flickered there. Always had. A reminder that institutions, like people, often carried their weakest parts the longest. Inside, raised voices echoed off concrete walls. Not shouting. Controlled, defensive. They stopped outside a room where several recruits stood rigid, backs straight, faces pale. In the center was the same recruit Arya had noticed days earlier, the one who hesitated. His hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "What happened?" Arya asked. One of the instructors began to speak. Rain lifted a hand. Arya stepped forward instead. She didn't raise her voice. "Tell me," she said, eyes on the recruit. He swallowed. "I corrected a call," he said. "During planning, I thought the route was wrong. And they said I was undermining authority." Arya's gaze slid to the others. "Did you raise your voice?" she asked him. "No, ma'am." "Did you insult anyone?" "No." She turned to the senior instructor. "Why is he here?" The man hesitated. That told her everything. "Because he was right," she said quietly. The room went still. She stepped closer to the instructor, not invading space, just narrowing it. "Correction isn't disrespect," she said. "Silence in the face of error is." The instructor's jaw tightened. "With respect, Major, constant questioning breaks cohesion." Arya nodded once. "Unquestioned authority breaks people." She turned back to the recruit. "You're dismissed." He looked stunned. "Ma'am." "Go," she said, "and don't stop trusting your read." When the door closed behind him, Arya faced the others. "This isn't the old system," she said. "If you can't tell the difference between ego and leadership, you won't last here." Later, Rain walked beside her in silence. "You'll make enemies," he said. She didn't slow. "I already have." Why does resistance always wear the mask of tradition? The pushback didn't come all at once. It never did. It came in emails worded politely but edged with doubt, in meetings where her methods were praised publicly and questioned privately, in subtle exclusions, briefings scheduled without her, decisions made just before she arrived. Arya noticed everything. She said little. She had learned long ago that reaction fed resistance. Consistency starved it. Still, the weight accumulated. One evening, after a 14-hour day, she found herself standing alone in the gym, hands braced on parallel bars, breathing harder than the movement warranted. Her muscles trembled, not from exertion but restraint. She dropped to the mat and sat, back against the wall. This was the part no one talked about. The loneliness that followed ethical clarity. The way doing the right thing rarely came with reinforcement, only friction. Her mind drifted, uninvited, to the past. A different facility, a different command, a mission that had gone wrong not because of bad intelligence, but because no one had spoken up when something felt off. She had. The fallout had been quiet, administrative, final. She rubbed her wrists absently, where phantom pressure still lived. Some lessons never fully left the body. What does mentorship look like when you refuse to break people first? The three recruits progressed steadily. Not spectacularly, not in a way that drew attention. But when things went wrong, and they always did, they adapted faster. They spoke up sooner. They trusted each other without posturing. Arya watched it happen piece by piece. During one exercise, Rainier made a navigation error. Instead of defending it, he owned it immediately and adjusted. Hana backed him without hesitation. Tors redistributed weight without being asked. Afterward, Arya said only, "Good correction." That was enough. Later, Tors approached her hesitant. "Ma'am, can I ask something?" "Yes." "Why don't you ever tell us we're doing well?" Arya studied him. "Do you need me to?" He thought about it, then shook his head. "No." "Good," she said. "Confidence that needs applause doesn't last under pressure." He nodded slowly, understanding settling in. Why does accountability feel like punishment to those who have never carried it? The reckoning arrived during a full-scale joint exercise. Multiple teams, external evaluators, high visibility. Arya stood back, hands clasped behind her, watching patterns form and fracture. She didn't interfere. This wasn't her stage. Midway through, a unit bypassed a safety check to gain time. Arya felt it before it was flagged. She stepped forward, stopped the exercise. Groans rippled through the line. Frustration flared. She addressed the unit calmly. "Who made the call?" Silence. She waited. Finally, one recruit stepped forward. "I did." "Why?" "To keep us competitive." Arya nodded. "And if this wasn't training?" The recruit hesitated. "People would have died," someone said quietly from the back. Arya let that voice carry. She dismissed the unit for remediation. No yelling, no humiliation. Later, command questioned her decision. Time lost, metrics impacted. She listened, then said, "You can recover numbers, you can't recover judgment." The exercise report noted her intervention as overly cautious. Rain caught her eye across the room. She shrugged slightly. Let them write what they needed to. Why does leadership demand sacrifice no one sees? That night, Arya returned to her quarters exhausted in a way sleep wouldn't fix. She sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, and stared at the floor. She thought of the recruits sent home, of the ones staying, of the ones watching undecided. Change was never loud at first. It was subtle, uncomfortable, easy to undo if no one protected it. She lay back and closed her eyes. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was this enough? Was she? Her breathing slowed. She remembered the pool, the choice not to surface, the control it had required. Leadership was the same. You stayed under longer than was comfortable, so others could learn there was air. The doubt didn't vanish, but it quieted. Why does respect deepen only after trust is tested? Weeks passed. The yard felt different now, not softer, sharper, more intentional. Recruits corrected each other without aggression. Instructors adjusted tone. Mistakes were addressed early, not hidden. Arya rarely spoke in formation anymore. She didn't need to. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, she watched her 3 recruits lead a mixed team through a complex scenario. They weren't the loudest. They weren't the fastest. They were the most stable. Rain stood beside her. "You changed them," he said. "No," Arya replied. "They changed themselves." He nodded. "You just made it safe to do so." She watched as the team completed the exercise, tired but intact. For the first time since arriving, she felt something close to pride, not in herself, but in what had taken root. Leadership, she realized, wasn't about being seen. It was about what kept working after you stepped back. And that, more than survival, was the measure that mattered. Why does the past return just when you think you've outrun it? The call came at 300. No alarms, no raised voices, just a quiet knock and a single sentence that changed the weight of the day before it even began. "Major Monroe, you're needed." Arya dressed without asking questions. She learned long ago that real problems didn't announce themselves loudly. They arrived carefully, respectfully, like they already knew your name. The briefing room lights were low when she entered. Captain Rain stood near the screen, arms crossed, expression unreadable. 2 unfamiliar officers sat at the table, clean uniforms, neutral faces, the kind that carried authority without wearing it openly. Rain didn't waste time. "We've received a request," he said. "Operational review, external." Arya took a seat. "Of what?" "Of you." That landed harder than she expected. The screen flickered to life. Grainy footage filled the wall, night vision, uneven terrain, audio distorted by wind and breathing. Her breathing. She recognized the cadence immediately, the way she'd paced herself through a ravine under fire years ago. She didn't look away. One of the officers spoke. "Ghost program, Eastern Corridor, 5 years ago." Arya nodded. "Yes." "There's renewed interest in the operation," the other said. "Specifically in a decision you made." The footage paused on a moment she remembered too well. A fork in the route. A call made without time to debate. Rain watched her carefully. He hadn't known this part of her history, not in detail. "What decision?" Arya asked, though she already knew. The officer answered evenly. "You diverted from command directive. You chose to extract a civilian asset instead of pursuing the primary target." The room went quiet. That choice had saved a life. It had also cost them the mission. "I stand by it," Arya said. The officer inclined his head slightly. "That's what concerns command." Rain stiffened. "With respect." "This isn't a disciplinary hearing," the first officer interrupted. "It's a context review. given Major Monroe's current role. Arya felt it then, the connection forming. They weren't questioning her past. They were testing whether she would repeat it. Why does integrity look like defiance from the outside? The review lasted hours. They dissected timelines, paused footage, replayed decisions made in seconds as if they'd had hours to spare. Arya answered every question calmly, precisely, without apology. Yes, she said, when asked if she would make the same call again. Yes, when asked if she believed orders could be overridden. And yes, when asked if she understood the cost. What you're teaching recruits now, one officer said carefully, encourages independent judgment. It encourages responsible judgment, Arya corrected. That's a fine line. Only if you confuse obedience with loyalty. Silence followed. Rain watched the exchange, something shifting behind his eyes. He was seeing her fully now, not just the leader who survived the pool, but the operative who had once chosen a life over a mission and paid for it quietly. Finally, the officers stood. We'll forward our assessment, one said. Until then, your program continues. Arya rose, thank you. They left without shaking hands. Rain waited until the door closed. You never told me. You never asked. He exhaled slowly. They were seeing if you'd hesitate now. No, Arya said. They were seeing if I'd break. What happens when recruits see the weight their leader carries? Word traveled faster than Arya expected. Not the details, just the sense that something had shifted above them. Recruits watched her more closely. Instructors deferred a little longer before speaking. The three she mentored noticed immediately. During a break, Hana approached her. Ma'am, are you okay? Arya studied her face, not fear, concern. I'm fine, she said. Hana hesitated. You seem heavier. Arya almost smiled. Leadership has gravity, she said instead. You feel it more when you stop pretending it doesn't exist. That afternoon's training was harder, not physically, mentally. Decision trees, moral trade-offs, scenarios without clean outcomes. Rainier struggled with one. There's no right answer, he said, frustrated. Arya nodded. Now you're learning. Tors looked up. Then how do you choose? Arya met his gaze. You choose the answer you can carry afterward. They fell silent. Why does doubt sharpen just before commitment? That night, Arya walked alone beyond the perimeter fence. The desert was quiet, honest. It didn't pretend to care. She stopped where the ground sloped downward and stared at the stars, hard points of light that had watched humanity make the same mistakes for centuries. The Ghost program had ended her career trajectory without ceremony. No medals taken, no accusations spoken aloud, just a quiet reassignment and a reputation that followed her like a shadow. She accepted it then. But standing here now, she felt the old weight pressing back in. Was she shaping these recruits into leaders or liabilities? The question didn't scare her. The answer did. Because deep down she knew the truth. She was shaping them into people who would hesitate. And hesitation in the wrong hands got people killed. She closed her eyes. Panic kills faster than water. So does certainty without conscience. Why does trust demand proof, not promises? The test came sooner than expected. A night exercise escalated unexpectedly when communications failed across multiple teams. Confusion spread. Time slipped. Arya watched from the command point as voices overlapped and positions blurred. Then she saw it. A choice. One team was boxed in. Another had a clear route to objective but would leave them exposed. No one was issuing orders fast enough. Her three recruits were in the field. Arya's fingers tightened against the table. She could override, step in, correct it. She didn't. Minutes stretched. Then Rainier spoke over comms. Calm, clear. We're diverting, objective can wait. Hanna backed him instantly. Tors adjusted coverage. The trap team extracted safely. The exercise failed on paper. But everyone came back. The room was silent. Rain turned slowly toward her. You trained them to do that. Yes, Arya said. You know how this will read. Yes. He studied her. Do you regret it? Arya watched the feeds fade to black. No. Why does redemption never look the way you expect? The after-action review was brutal. Metrics, missed objectives, deviations. Command frowned. Arya listened. Then she spoke. You asked for leaders, she said, not followers. This is what that looks like in real time. The room shifted. One evaluator finally said, they chose people over points. Arya nodded, so did I once. No one challenged her. The review ended without resolution. But something else happened. Later that evening, Rain found her outside the barracks. They're not shutting you down, he said. She looked at him. That's not approval. It's respect, he replied, the reluctant kind. She exhaled. Why does the hardest part come after you're proven right? That night, Tors knocked on her door. Ma'am, he said, standing stiffly, I just wanted to say thank you. For what? For letting us choose, he said, even knowing it might cost us. Arya looked at him for a long moment. Choosing always costs something, she said. Just make sure it's not your integrity. He nodded and left. Alone again, Arya sat on the edge of her bed. The past hadn't come back to punish her. It had come back to measure her. And for the first time, she felt ready to be measured again. Because redemption wasn't about erasing old decisions. It was about standing by them, quietly, when they resurfaced. And tomorrow, the final test would begin. Why does the final test arrive when no one calls it a test? It began like any other morning. No alarms, no urgent briefings, just the low hum of the facility waking itself up, generators cycling, boots striking concrete in familiar rhythm. Arya Monroe stood at the edge of the yard, hands clasped behind her back, watching the recruits assemble. Their movements were sharper now, quieter, less performative. They didn't know it yet, but this was the last day she would watch them like this. Captain Rain joined her without announcement. He followed her gaze for a long moment before speaking. Commands observing today. Arya nodded. I know. They won't interfere. They never do, she said. They just remember. Rain hesitated. There's talk of reinstatement, operational track. Arya didn't respond right away. The words stirred something old, something she had buried carefully. She kept her eyes forward. I didn't come here to be restored. I think they know that, Rain said, which is why they're considering it. The recruits were called forward. No explanation, no speeches, just an exercise briefing stripped down to essentials. Navigation, extraction, unknown variables, realistic margins. Arya watched her 3 recruits take quiet positions within mixed teams. They didn't cluster together. They didn't seek comfort in familiarity. That told her everything. As the teams moved out, she felt a strange calm settle over her. The kind that comes not from certainty, but from acceptance. Whatever happened next would happen without her hand on it. Why does trust feel heavier than command? The feeds came in staggered, terrain shifts, adjustments made, decisions taken without hesitation, but not without thought. Then midway through, something went wrong. Not dramatically, not catastrophically. One team reported a simulated casualty with limited mobility. Another flagged compromised terrain ahead. Timelines began to slip. Arya leaned forward slightly. She could already see the fault lines forming, not in the plan, but in the people. Pressure didn't break you all at once. It worked slowly, persuasively. A voice crackled over comms, a junior leader requesting guidance. All eyes turned toward Arya. She didn't answer. Rain glanced at her. They're waiting. They're thinking, she replied. Seconds stretched. Then Hana's voice cut in, calm, measured. We reroute, lose time, keep the team intact. Another voice followed, not defensive, supportive. Renur. Then Tors, adjusting coverage, filling gaps without being asked. The decision cascaded, not from authority but alignment. The exercise shifted. Objectives were missed. But no one was left behind. When the final team returned, dust-covered and exhausted, the yard was silent. No applause. No reprimand. Just breathing. Why does failure feel different when no one is ashamed? The after-action review took place in the same room where Arya had once been evaluated herself. Same table, same sterile lighting, different weight. Command representatives spoke first. Numbers, deviations, missed benchmarks. Arya listened. Then she stood. You asked for resilience, she said. You asked for leaders who adapt under pressure. Today, you saw them choose people over performance. One of the evaluators frowned. That's not always viable in live operations. No, Arya agreed, but neither is blind momentum. The room shifted. Rain watched quietly. These recruits, Arya continued, will fail missions. That's reality, but they will not fail each other, and that's what keeps missions from becoming funerals. Silence followed. Then one of the officers, older, quieter, spoke. You taught them to carry consequence. Yes, Arya said, before it carries them. No one argued. The review concluded without verdict. But something had changed. Why does closure arrive without ceremony? That evening, Arya walked alone toward the pool. The lights were on this time, the water perfectly still, unthreatening, ordinary. She sat at the edge and removed her boots, placing them neatly beside her, rolled up her sleeves. For a long moment, she did nothing. Then she slipped her feet into the water. Cold. Honest. She breathed slowly, counted heartbeats, let the memory surface without pulling her under. She didn't need to prove anything here anymore. Footsteps approached. Rain stopped beside her. They're offering you the track, he said. Full reinstatement, field command potential. Arya nodded. I expected as much. You're not answering. She looked at the water. I already did. Rain studied her. You're staying. Yes. With them. With whoever comes next too, she said. Someone needs to make sure the lessons don't fade. Rain smiled faintly. They won't, not after today. Why does legacy matter more than position? The recruits gathered at dusk. No formation, no formal dismissal. Arya stood in front of them, hands relaxed at her sides. You won't remember every drill, she said. You won't remember every order, but you'll remember how it felt to be trusted when the outcome wasn't guaranteed. She looked at them one by one. You will be tested, she continued, by fear, by pride, by people who mistake authority for worth. When that happens, remember this place. She gestured subtly around them. Remember that strength doesn't announce itself. It holds steady. No one spoke. She nodded once, dismissed. They didn't move right away. Then slowly, one by one, they came to attention. Not because they were told. Because they chose to. Why does dignity leave the deepest mark? Later that night, Arya returned to her quarters and packed away the last of her operational files. She didn't need them anymore. The work had moved beyond paper. She paused, holding one final item, a faded patch from the Ghost program. She considered it for a long moment. Then she placed it in a drawer. Some chapters didn't need closure. They needed continuity. As she turned off the light, she felt something rare settle into place. Not pride. Peace. She had been tied, thrown, tested. Not just by water, but by power, by silence, by choice. And she had risen without fear. Not because she was unbreakable, but because she understood what mattered. Sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes leadership isn't visible. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.